Good morning, everyone. Happy Sunday, Steelers Nation. I hope you're all having a fantastic Saturday filled with peace, health, and great news. Today, we have some important updates coming out of Pittsburgh that every Steelers fan needs to know, and they could have a big impact on the team moving forward. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss any breaking Steelers news. Now, let's get straight to today's biggest headlines. The biggest concern surrounding the Steelers right now is not what happened on the field during Thursday's closed practice in Latrobe, but what happened to several players who are suddenly dealing with injuries at a position where Pittsburgh cannot afford to get any thinner. Max Heyward left Wednesday's practice with a shoulder injury, but Mike McCarthy provided encouraging news, saying the first-round rookie offensive tackle will not practice for the next couple of days, but could be back as early as Monday. That is a major difference from the kind of injury situation that could have derailed his development early in camp. Hunter had already been showing well during the first padded practices, so the fact that Pittsburgh appears to have avoided something serious is extremely important, and there is another reason this situation is not quite as frightening as it could have been. Dylan Cook remains healthy and is expected to be the starting right tackle in Week 1, while continuing to play well during training camp. So even if Hunter had been forced to miss significant time, Pittsburgh would still have had an option at the position. But nobody wants to see a first-round rookie lose valuable practice time, especially when he is trying to establish himself and learn what this Steelers offense is going to demand from him. For now, the message is simple. Heyward appears to be okay, and Pittsburgh is hoping to see him back on the field very soon. The much more uncertain situation involves Brandon Echols. McCarthy said Echols will miss the next 2 days after suffering an injury during Wednesday's practice, but unlike Heyward, there was no indication that he could simply return Monday. The situation became even more concerning after Echols' brother posted a photo showing significant swelling around his foot. Based strictly on what we know from this report, the Steelers may have to prepare for Echols to miss more than just a couple of practices. And if that happens, the secondary becomes an even bigger concern because Pittsburgh is already dealing with multiple players who are unavailable. Jalen Ramsey is dealing with a knee injury that is not considered especially serious, but he is still out. Dante Kent is also out, and there was a report that Jaquan Brisker left practice early with an injury. That combination suddenly puts the Steelers in a difficult position in the defensive backfield during an important stretch of training camp. The team needs to keep evaluating different combinations, and one name that could become especially interesting is Asante Samuel Jr. McCarthy has already said Samuel can play both inside and outside, and that versatility could become extremely valuable if the injuries continue to affect this group. Pittsburgh could use Samuel inside in the slot while giving Dallon Everett an opportunity to work outside with the first-team defense. Another possibility would be keeping Samuel outside and allowing Everett to take over the big nickel role that Ramsey has been handling. And that second option is particularly intriguing because Everett brings something that could fit very well in that role. His ability to defend the run. That is one of the situations worth watching closely as the Steelers continue through camp. Nobody wants injuries to dictate the depth chart, but when they happen, they also create opportunities. Everett could potentially get an extended look in a role that may become important for Pittsburgh, while Samuel could demonstrate just how valuable his ability to play multiple positions can be. For a defense operating under Patrick Graham, having defensive backs who can move around and handle different responsibilities can be extremely useful. But the secondary injuries are only one part of the story, because one of the biggest discussions coming out of this Steelers training camp involves something that is not happening at all: live tackling. Cam Heyward, the team's defensive captain, has made it clear that he is not completely comfortable with the decision to eliminate live tackling during training camp. Heyward has always believed that teams need some form of tackling during camp because players need to experience the physical demands of bringing opponents to the ground before the regular season begins. His argument is straightforward. You do not want to reach Week 1 wondering whether your players can actually make the tackles you are counting on them to make. You want to know what they can do before the games start counting. And honestly, there is a legitimate argument on both sides here. The Steelers have historically been one of the more physical teams during training camp, and that physical preparation can absolutely help a team become ready for the beginning of the season. But there is another side that cannot be ignored, especially with this particular Pittsburgh roster. This is an older football team, and the physical toll of an extremely demanding training camp can accumulate over an entire season. Pittsburgh has had situations in recent years where the team looked strong early, appeared prepared, and then seemed to lose energy as December and January arrived. That is why McCarthy's decision could actually make sense even if Heyward disagrees with it. The Steelers are still practicing in pads. Players are still dealing with physical battles at the line of scrimmage. Offensive linemen are still blocking, defensive linemen are still fighting through blocks, and players are still working on tackling technique without actually taking every opponent to the ground. And importantly, the Steelers will have preseason games where players can experience live tackling in actual game situations. So this is not a situation where Pittsburgh suddenly decided that physical football does not matter. It is more about how the team wants to distribute that physical workload throughout the season. McCarthy may be trying to preserve some of that energy now so that his veteran roster has more left when the games become more important later in the year. And then there is Cam Heyward himself, because his comments about the future may be even more significant than his disagreement over tackling. Heyward says his current plan is to play out the remaining 2 years of his contract and then retire, although he has left the door open to the possibility of reconsidering that decision. That means the Steelers could potentially be looking at a very important countdown involving one of the most respected players in the organization, and this is where the quarterback situation could eventually become connected to Heyward's future. If Aaron Rodgers retires after this season, Pittsburgh could enter the following year with a first-year starting quarterback. Whether that quarterback comes from the draft or is one of the young players already in the organization, the Steelers could be asking a veteran like Heyward to remain through another transition. Heyward's priority is still winning, and if Pittsburgh reaches a point where his final opportunity to chase a championship does not appear to be with the Steelers, the possibility of a trade could at least become a discussion. That is not something the report says is happening right now, and it should not be treated as an established plan. It is simply a possibility raised by the circumstances surrounding his contract, his timeline, and the quarterback situation. But there is another player whose situation could have a much more immediate impact on this defense, and that is Peyton Wilson. Wilson has reportedly looked significantly better during the opening portion of training camp, particularly against the run. This is important because his ability to attack downhill and play with enough physicality had been one of the areas where he needed to improve. During the padded practices, however, Wilson has been described as physical, aggressive, capable of getting off blocks, and consistently making stops. Those are exactly the kinds of flashes Steelers fans have been waiting to see from him, and Wilson himself has credited Patrick Graham and the new defensive system for helping him play with more freedom. His mentality appears to have changed. Instead of playing afraid of making a mistake, he is being encouraged to play aggressively and accept that mistakes are part of football. For a player with Wilson's athletic ability, that could be a very important development. Right now, Patrick Queen is still projected to handle the largest share of snaps at inside linebacker and could be the player wearing the green dot. But Wilson is also taking on communication responsibilities, while Cole Holcomb has been rotating alongside him with the first-team defense. That creates a very interesting situation because Pittsburgh does not necessarily need Wilson to immediately take over everything. What the Steelers need is for him to become the player they believed he could be when they drafted him. If Wilson takes a major step forward, if Queen becomes more reliable in coverage and against the run, and if Holcomb can remain healthy, suddenly a position that has been a concern could become a strength. And that might be one of the biggest stories to watch as this training camp continues. The Steelers have injuries creating questions in the secondary, a veteran leader challenging a major camp decision, and a young linebacker potentially showing signs that he is finally ready to break out. With so many moving pieces, which of these developments do you think will have the biggest impact on Pittsburgh's 2026 season? What makes this situation even more interesting is that Pittsburgh may be entering a stretch of camp where the biggest developments are not necessarily going to come from the players who are already established. The injuries are forcing the coaching staff to look deeper into the roster, while the changes under Mike McCarthy and Patrick Graham are giving players like Peyton Wilson a chance to show a different version of themselves. For Wilson, that opportunity is especially important because the Steelers need to know whether his improvement in camp can translate into something consistent once the games become real. Looking good for a few padded practices is one thing. Becoming a dependable 3-down linebacker is another, but the early signs are exactly what Pittsburgh wanted to see. He is attacking downhill, playing with more confidence, getting through blocks, and making plays against the run. Those were areas that had previously held him back, and now they appear to be developing into strengths. The most encouraging part may actually be the way Wilson is describing his own game. He said he finally feels like he can be himself. That matters because the physical tools have never really been the question. Wilson has the athletic ability to cover ground, chase plays, and make difficult tackles. The bigger question has been whether he would play fast enough and confidently enough to consistently use those tools at the NFL level. Patrick Graham's message appears to be giving him permission to do exactly that. Make a mistake, but make it aggressively. Trust what you see and attack. For a young linebacker, that kind of mentality can change everything. Instead of hesitating for a fraction of a second, Wilson can react and let his athleticism take over. And if that continues, Pittsburgh could suddenly have a very different linebacker group than the one we saw struggle in previous seasons. Patrick Queen remains an important part of the picture, and the Steelers are counting on him to be more consistent. Cole Holcomb brings experience when healthy, but Wilson has something that could make the entire group more dynamic, the potential to become the physical, athletic presence that Pittsburgh has been missing in the middle of the defense. There is still a lot that has to happen before anyone can call Wilson a breakout player. Training camp is not the regular season, and